Hey everyone, I'm Cloudjumper, and this is my breakdown of my entry for Bad Snacks Beat Battle number 9 for my track Bean Juice's Life. This track isn't out yet. It might come out at some point. If so, I will drop you a link in the description. For now, it's just to show you how I've made this, and just to begin, I'll play you a little bit of it. Here we go. Yeah, so that's the track. And now I'm just gonna go through a real simple of how I made this. This is a actually super simple, minimalistic production. There's not a lot going on here, but I'll still show you how I did it. Oh yeah, and I should probably preface this by saying the conditions of this beat battle was that we were exclusively allowed to use the samples that were provided by Bean, aka Bismuth, from the server, who won the last battle, and those samples were really funky and really cool. I've never really done a beat breakdown before, so I hope this sort of works for you. I'm just going to do it in the most straightforward way I can think of, and let's start by looking into the drums. What I did on the drums is I sampled a couple of drum sounds out of the samples we got from Bean, aka Bismuth, and then I put them into a drum rack. I did very minimal sample altering, and then I just processed them and made this drum loop. So I took this hat and this hat, and then I have a little snare here, or like a extra perk sound that I didn't actually end up using. I have two kicks. I only ended up using the second one, and then this is the clap. And I think the kick is pitched down a little bit, but everything else is pretty much just the way the sample is. Maybe I shortened the sample span a little bit. So yeah, then this is the kind of a pattern that I went with, and it's a really straightforward boom bap kind of super simple drum pattern. There's no layering, there's no crazy magic or anything going on. This is super minimal in all the way that this track is produced. Yeah, and this is almost pretty much on beat, even there's very little bit of flow or groove in it. But it's almost exactly on beat for the most part. And then the processing that's on there is some drum sauce. And this is basically, as you can hear, what gives the main character and space to the drums. A little bit of utility to just sort of level it back down. And then I have a neutron on here, which isn't doing that much. There's a little bit of spectral shaping going on. Then I have a mild EQ on here, a tiny bit of excitement. As you can see, these are all only mixed in partially. And then there's a little bit of compression as well. That's pretty much it. This kind of neutron is pretty much on every track, so I'm not going to show that every time, but the only thing that varies is really how much of that gets mixed in. And yeah, those are the drums. So for the bass, all that I did is basically the one bass sample that we got. I threw it into a sampler. I zoomed in really deep, and I just grabbed this little wave note, this tiny little waveform, and yeah, then I put a bunch of effects on it. First, it sounds like this right now. So just looped, and then I put a little bit of portamento on it, and gave it a little bit of tag, and then filtered it. Their utility here doesn't do much other than a little gain reduction and putting it a little bit more center already, or a little more mono. And I played in my bass line. And then our bass is providing some extra low end. Builds it out, makes it a little fatter. I have some micro shift on there, just to give it a little more kind of dimension. And then again, the neutron, which in this case does a lot of spectral shaping and gives it that sort of fat low end saturation in there. And that's all that's really going on with the bass. And then there's a little interplay that I put in between the drum and the bass. So just soloing those two, that sounds like this. So you can see how these work together. Okay, and next let's take a look at the chords. Okay, so for the chords I used the toy flute sample that I think we all probably overused. This was the most versatile sample, I think, in the whole pack. You could make anything out of this. I used it mainly for these chords. First I sampled it here. I didn't do much to it other than filter it a little bit down here and pitch it in such a way that it's more or less pitched to a standard C. Yeah, and then it sounds kind of like this without any processing. Right, and then that's also looped. And then I played in my chords, or rather like took some inspiration in this case from chord skipping in Cthulhu. Came up with this chord progression and then altered it a little bit, and then that's what we started out with. Queued out some low end. Give it a little bit low, like a little dip in the high shelf. Utility to quiet it down, widen it a little bit, pan it to the left here. Then I use a little one knob louder to fatten it up, and micro shift. This is really what gives it the stereo space that it sits in, and a little bit of that sort of very Rhodesy kind of character. an echo boy to even further bring that out. Now it really kind of starts sounding like a Rhodes, and I gave it some vintage reverb with Valhalla vintage reverb. This is also what's mainly providing the space for the track. The compressor, that's side chaining from the kick drum. A little bit of EQ. And then there is just an auto filter for the filter up in the beginning, and the neutron that I had already mentioned. Again, so what you can see back here is just the same chords doubled up an octave higher with just a slightly similar processing, and it's just to kind of give it a little extra oomph, you know, in the last chorus. Okay, let's take a look at the lead keys here. These are basically this gleaming ivory sample, which to me sounds kind of like it's a piano with some strings under it. Or it could just be a piano that got recorded directly in the string field or like on the harp with something that brings out the vibration and resonance of the strings maybe. So yeah, whatever it is, it was already really beautiful sound. So in this case, what I did is I only changed the, I didn't even change the tuning. I think it was already like the way I wanted it or usable on C. And then it plays this little melody, right? And so I gave it some EQ, I put some treble tap on it. And then I gave it some handman. Again, this is the other aspect of the track that provides spacing and spectral field or stereo field to this whole beat basically. A little bit of utility. This is just bringing it out a tiny bit in volume and just widening it ever so slightly. And this black hole isn't really doing much. It just comes out here to fade and gives a tiny bit of more reverb resonance. And then there's the neutron as usual. In this case, we have a little more aggressive spectral shaping going on, and I think also a little more widening. Okay, now let's take a look at what's probably my favorite part, which is the sort of guitar of the track. This does both the fondly dubbed froggy sound in the track, and then also the distorted solo later and the chords. So I basically took this sound here and I don't think there's a lot of processing going on. I pitched it down a little bit so that it sits on C, and I gave it this very sharp envelope to make it kind of plucky. That changes, that's automated, that changes later on obviously for the chords, and give it a little bit of filter with a tiny bit of resonant spike here. Without any processing, you would be barely able to hear that. So here's how that got processed. Also, the solo would sound like nothing. Right, so this is really just mostly alive because of the processing. So what's happening here is first there's a devil log that's basically providing most of the distortion. And I really like just how devil log sounds in pretty much anything I love, or it sounds like that. And then we got some EQ on, some filter freak on there to give it that sort of wah-wah feeling. And that's, I guess, what makes it so froggy. A little bit of EQ. There is an automated reverb that shouldn't be here, but that provides some of the room later on in the solo. Next, we have the capitator that I didn't actually end up using, so I'll turn that off. And there's a black hole. That's actually the space that you hear there. And then there's a little utility that is alternating the balance, so the different pitch, the different panning, and a little bit of width automation, as well as some gain between these two parts that are different. And you can hear that on its own, there's like an enormous amount of reverb from Black Hole on here. The thing is that while on its own, it really doesn't sound all that pleasant. This was the only way I could find to make it kind of fit in the mix as a whole. Obviously, it's also doubled up down here. Yeah, the only reason it is like this is because in context it sounded good. When I started out, I had it way more full and it was fun to play on, but it didn't end up sounding good in context. So yeah, now it sounds like this. Okay, and so the last aspect that we can look at here is basically the pad that's underneath it all. This is the raw sample that I took that on from, I guess, the toy flute. In this case, I looped the last little section in sampler. And I gave it a lot of attack, very simple little filter, and of course I pitched it again in the same way as before. And then all that's on there is the utility. This is just gain reduction and a little widening. There's an EQ, and then really the main meat of the processing comes from Echo Boy, and then from Panman, which you probably haven't picked up so much in the mix. I think it gets kind of swallowed a little bit, but it pans really heavily. And in context of the mix, that sounded really nice. It just gave it some sort of wideness and perceived space that I think was missing before. A little bit of auto filter happening. And if I extend the loop here, you can also see that this shifts octaves up and down as the song goes on. I have a little compressor here that's just side chaining again to the kick. Gives it also a little more of that rhythmic feeling. And just another neutron that isn't doing all that much, just like before. So yeah, that's the breakdown. I don't know, like I said, this was probably one of the most minimalistic tracks I've ever made. And yeah, I hope you had fun watching how I made this, and you learned something maybe, or got inspired to try something out. Normally my tracks aren't always that minimalistic, but in this case it just worked to do it that way. And yeah, if you have any questions, hit me up. See you next time. I can't wait for the next Beet battle and see what comes out of that. Okay, take care. Bye.